The American with Disabilities Act of 1990 prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in real estate and in other areas. This act protects disabled people across many different industries, and you'll need to understand how it works for your real estate exam. Hello everybody, it's Zach here from realestatelicensewizard.com. Today we're talking about the American with Disabilities Act of 1990. Let's get started. So what is the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990? Well, the American with Disabilities Act, or ADA, protects people with disabilities against discrimination in housing. This federal law states that housing providers must provide equal opportunities for persons with physical or mental impairments. So who is protected by the ADA? Well, any person with a legal disability is protected under the ADA. The ADA defines a person with a disability as having a physical or mental impairment that limits their major life activities, having a history or record of their impairment, and being perceived by others as having such an impairment. Examples of physical or mental disabilities that are covered by the ADA include, and I'll put the list on the screen, deafness, blindness, cancer, epilepsy, autism, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and more. So how does this exactly work and affect real estate? Well, the ADA plays a significant role in real estate. Under this act, housing providers must make reasonable accommodations and modifications to ensure disabled people can live comfortably in their units. If such accommodations are not made, housing providers can face legal repercussions. So then what is this reasonable accommodation in housing? What exactly does that mean? Well, according to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, a reasonable accommodation is a change or exception to a rule, policy, or service that allows a person with disabilities access to housing. A housing provider must ensure their public spaces in a facility are accessible to individuals with disabilities. This includes hallways, laundry rooms, lobbies, elevators, parking lots, amenities. If these areas are inaccessible and a person with a disability requests accommodations, the housing provider must resolve the issue. So some examples of this would look like assigning a handicapped parking space for persons with mobility impairments, allowing a tenant with mobility issues to live on a ground floor unit, or maybe installing a grab bar in a tenant's shower, things like that. So what types of property are covered by the ADA? Well, the ADA covers most housing types, including private housing, state and local government housing, public housing, and federally assisted housing programs. This means that apartment buildings, hotels, motels, inns, and other housing units must comply with the ADA. Now, there are some property or some types of property that are not covered by the ADA. So this would include residential properties, religious organizations, and private clubs. This means that privately owned homes, churches, and clubs do not necessarily have to apply to the ADA. However, it's still typically in best interest for them to apply to ADA. So examples of ADA violations in real estate would be perhaps incorrectly using handicap signs or not using them at all, installing ramps with an improper slope or maybe no railways, missing an accessible counter for persons with wheelchairs, and I'm just going to leave a bunch more on the screen, but essentially there's quite a few. So let's take a look at an example of a disability discrimination lawsuit that occurred recently in 2021. So according to the HUD, a Las Vegas landlord and property manager was accused of disability discrimination in 2021. These housing providers denied housing to a woman with an assistant animal. The woman claimed that after she signed the lease, the owner and manager refused to rent the house to her because of her service dog. This discrimination violates the ADA and the Fair Housing Act of 1968. As a result, the courts ruled that the owner must pay a certain amount of money to the tenant and take fair housing training courses. The owner and property manager also had to comply with the ADA and make reasonable accommodations for this tenant. So who enforces the American with Disabilities Act? Well, the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity enforces the ADA in real estate. If a person with a disability faces unfair and unnecessary discrimination, they can contact the Fair Housing and Equity Opportunity Office to have their claim investigated. However, it's important to note that several federal agencies are also responsible for enforcing the ADA because it's across multiple industries. So for example, I'll just put them on the screen, the Department of Labor, Department of Transportation, the FCC, things like that. But when a person or a business is found guilty of violating the ADA, they will all be penalized, essentially no matter what relevant agency. So what are the penalties for violating the ADA? Well, it could be up to $75,000 for a first-time violation and $150,000 for additional violations. In some regions, the fines for violating the ADA may even be higher, Some state and some local governments have even stricter rules for this. But businesses who violate the ADA must also face further financial damages due to obviously like a tarnished reputation. I mean, it would be horrible for a business to, be heard that they're, breaking these rules, and it would be a poor reflection of the company's ethics. So now there was amendments made to the ADA in 2008. The ADA Amendments Act of 2008 empowered the ADA to protect more people with disabilities. So before this amendment, the Supreme Court had interpreted the definition of disability very narrowly. This meant that individuals with certain disabilities were not winning their cases against housing discrimination. The ADA Amendments Act expanded the definition of disability so that more people with physical or mental impairments were protected under the law. So how can real estate agents uphold the ADA? How does this directly apply to them? Well, as a future real estate professional like yourself, it's your job to follow the ADA and help reduce housing discrimination. Real estate agents should familiarize themselves with the ADA rules, work with companies who comply with the ADA, recommend accessible housing units for individuals with disabilities, and ensure that their websites are accessible for disabled people. So really just being that really good real estate agent, making sure you're not discriminating and making sure your clients aren't getting discriminated, and making sure that they're aware of those rules. So what do you need to know for the real estate exam? We need to be familiar with the ADA. The ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, prohibits the discrimination against people with disabilities in housing and in other areas. This act requires that housing providers make reasonable accommodation to help persons with disabilities. Because the Americans with Disabilities Act is an important part of the fair housing conversation in general, it does show up on the real estate exam, so you need to be aware of it. Hopefully this video helped. For more videos like this on fair housing, click here and click here to subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, see ya. Bye-bye.